Okay. Couple of yeses. Perfect. So today we're going to be going over chapter 14. So the material that we're going over this week and next week, that'll be part of our final exam. At the moment, our final exam I have scheduled for after Thanksgiving on the date that we were given. I believe it's December 2nd. I have it written down right here. Yes, December 2nd. And it'll be the same setup as all of our other exams, where it'll open at 7, close at 11:55. You have all day, 2 hours unless you have accommodations, things like that. And it'll be about 25% from each exam. So, and what I like to do usually is to make it easier on myself and on you guys is I pick very, very, very similar questions to what were on the other exams. I don't like just pull out a random question that I haven't asked before, things like that. So if it's a topic over something that was on another exam, it will either be the same subject or the exact same question or things like that. So I'm not pulling anything out of left field. And then the last couple of weeks here, we're going to be going over the nervous system. We're going to be going over chapter 16, which is the endocrine system. And then next week, we'll be doing drugs, psychoactive drugs, and it's broken up into 2 sections. And then we will have our final exam, but we can continue to talk about it. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going over chapter 14. You can follow along on my screen, or if you have the PowerPoint pulled up in front of you as well, you can find it on my Wartburg. There's also, I should have said this too as well, there's also a final exam study guide that you can find on my Wartburg. And we will have a lecture assignment over this, and I believe it'll be due on Friday. So here's our PowerPoint about the nervous system. We're going to be talking about the divisions of the nervous system. So the nervous system, you maybe think of like, oh, the way you can have sensations, like feel things or see things, which is correct. There's different divisions of that nervous system. We're going to talk about different types of neurons. So neurons are the cells that are made up of our nervous system. And I'll be able to show you a couple different pictures. They are branch-like. They work as if they are kind of like a telephone system that's really fast. Maybe when you were a kid, or I guess maybe in college, you've ever played the game telephone, where you sit in a circle and everybody kind of whispers a sentence or a phrase, and then you sit around in that circle and you pass it through. Now, most of the time, that message gets distorted. So our neurons work a little bit better than that. But essentially, it's that same thing where the neurons communicate to each other, working from your brain, your central nervous system, to the extremities of your body. We're going to talk about the different parts of your brain. When I was in undergrad, I took neurobiology and had to memorize everything about the brain. So don't worry, you guys don't have to do any of that. You don't have to memorize the locations. I'm not going to put a picture of a brain and make you memorize the different parts of the brain. But you may be tested on what the function of the brain is. And then there are different parts of the peripheral nervous system, which is also called the PNS. So here's a little diagram just about the different parts of the human nervous system. So the main parts are there bolded for you, the brain and the spinal cord. And it's probably what you think of as well when you're thinking of the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. You're thinking of that brain and your spinal cord. They're really important for sending messages throughout your body, both voluntary and involuntary, meaning things that you're consciously telling your body to do, and the things that your body does without you saying a single word or thinking anything. You have cranial nerves. You have 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and they are located up near the brain here. And then you have cervical nerves, which there are 8 pairs, and they're up in your cervical vertebrae. You have your thoracic nerves, which are essentially what you think they are. They're with your thoracic vertebrae in that thoracic cavity area. You have ulnar nerves, which are in your arms, which makes sense, right? We have our ulna is one of the bones in our arms. You have your lumbar nerves, which are kind of that lower portion of your vertebrae. Maybe you've had people, complain about their sciatic nerve. That's the nerve that goes down the side of their leg. You have the sacral nerves, which are down here near the sacrum, and then the coccygeal nerves, and that's just one pair down by the coccyx. So there's just different types of nerves and different parts to the human nervous system. So there's two divisions to this nervous system, like I was talking about. You mainly think of probably the brain and spinal cord, which is considered our central nervous system. The other division is the peripheral nervous system, and this is considered the nerves and the ganglia. So you have your brain and spinal cord, which is that central nervous system, CNS. And the way I think of it is it's just centrally located throughout the body and down that vertebrae. That's that brain and that spinal cord. But then you have all of these nerve cells, which are here, peripheral nervous system, that essentially act like the telephone poles or the electrical signals that get the messages to and your extremities from that brain and spinal cord. And then you have the ganglia inside the central nervous system and the spinal nerves, and then they kind of, and we'll see different pictures, but they branch out. These nerves branch throughout your body, your arms, your legs, your extremities, throughout your entire body, and they have different functions. And that would be the peripheral nervous system. So we have your central nervous system, CNS, and your peripheral nervous system, PNS. So the divisions of the vertebrae nervous system. So in the blue there, we have that central nervous system. So this is your brain and your spinal cord and how it works with the different extremities for different things, such as sensations. When you are looking at the screen right now, your eyes and the cells of your nervous system are communicating to your brain, and then your brain is telling you, okay, Professor Place is talking on Zoom right now. This is what I'm visualizing, and it's happening so fast that you're not thinking about it. Obviously, there are different complications that other people may deal with, but that's normally how it happens. What happens with your peripheral nervous system is a couple of different things. You have your cranial and spinal nerves, and then you have things called your autonomic nerves, your somatic nerves, and then your sympathetic division and your parasympathetic division. First, we have those autonomic nerves, and the way you can remember that is it looks like the word automatic, and these are the nerves that carry signals to and from the smooth muscles and the cardiac muscle and glands. So yes, your brain and your central nervous system are in charge of your heartbeat, and your brain is sending signals, electrical signals, through those nerves that are contracting and releasing that cardiac muscle. This also happens if you recently had lunch or you're going to have lunch after this and you ate some food. Your brain is sending signals to the smooth muscles of your stomach and your digestive system to move that food along, absorb the nutrients, and contract those muscles in order to digest the food. And also it has to do with glands. So your glands mainly make hormones. So if you think of all those hormones we talked about with the reproductive system that come from different glands, but there's other types of hormones too that maybe you're not thinking about as much, like such as different mood hormones, serotonin being one of them. Kind of blanking on a couple of other ones right now, but the nervous system can affect your mood because of the hormones that are produced. Hormones and release of hormones is a chemical reaction. Somatic nerves, these are your voluntary nerves, and these are the ones that carry signals to and from your skeletal muscle, your tendons, and your skin. Okay, so if you maybe have a pencil around you or a water bottle or your computer, and you tell your body, I'm going to pick up this water bottle, and you pick up the water bottle, the brain and your central nervous system sent that message to your arms and your muscles and the parts of your fingers that are, picking up the glass or the cup or the pencil or whatever it is. There's a little bit more complication to that, obviously, because your body has learned experiences that allow you to do that. So it's the same thing as a baby, when they put something in front of a baby, maybe the baby grabs onto the finger. It's learning about the surroundings. I'm not telling myself, okay, fingers bend at a 45-degree angle and then slowly go and pick up the cup and then bring it back into the screen. I'm not thinking of all of the little details of that, but I did tell myself the message to pick up that cup, which is a learned behavior. Then we have your sympathetic and your parasympathetic division. So the word para is what's going to divide those two phrases here to tell you the difference between the two. Your sympathetic division is at fight or flight. And maybe if you've ever taken a psychology class before, you've heard of the word fight or flight. This is our essentially humanly or animal-like response to danger. Okay, and this can happen in a couple of different ways. It's that adrenaline feeling. It's that protective, maybe something is going on that's very scary or dangerous that is impacting you. That's that fight or flight. Fight or flight means that as a human or as an animal, when we are, I guess, considered something as dangerous or something that is affecting our livelihood, we either fight it or you fly away. We don't have wings, but we could essentially, get out of that situation very quickly. Your parasympathetic division are the nerves that are that rest and digest phase. So we kind of are doing both of these that are involuntary. So when you have something that is an invader, or maybe you're working out or things like that, or maybe you're in a really intense video game or a sporting event, or you're just getting something where you're really invested to it, that fight or flight, that adrenaline may be that sympathetic division. Then you have that rest and digest phase. That's the parasympathetic division. So this is that central nervous system communicating to your body, which it's maybe pretty much doing right now, is when you're sitting down, your food may be digesting, your muscles are resting, and your body is telling it to do that. So those are the different divisions of the vertebrate nervous systems, and the difference between the involuntary and voluntary. So when you split this screen from left to right, these are the ones that are involuntary, and then this is the one that is voluntary. Here's a little visualization about how information is processed. So, for example, you're looking at your screen right now, hopefully, or your notes or your book or things like that. Your eyes make some sort of sensory input. Essentially, they collect data of some sort. So they go through this sensory input. Your brain kind of essentially interprets that or integrates it in a way that allows you to kind of establish what is going on. Then you have where it goes through your peripheral nerves, and it's going through your peripheral nerves here as well as here. This is considered the central nervous system here because it's going through the brain and the spinal cord. Then whatever you looked at, maybe you saw a car coming. So your eyes can see the car coming, and your brain says, oh, you should either, get back on the sidewalk or run a little bit faster across the street. It sends that motor output to this example to your legs, to the muscles in your legs that allow you to have that cognitive behavior that's either telling you to oh, hurry up across the street, here comes a car, or oh, you got to go back on that sidewalk, or whatever that situation is. So this is how that information is processed. So there's some sort of sensory input. It could be something as simple as putting your hand, like when you're a kid, on the stove. It's really hot. The sensation in your skin recognizes the temperature, and it sends signals to your brain and back to your arm to hopefully pull your hand away. So these are things that essentially your body's main goal is to survive and reproduce. So the way we do that is by noticing the sensations and the stimuli around us and making some sort of motor output. There are 3 types of neurons. and they're bolded next to the bullet points here. The first one is your sensory neurons, and that's the one we were kind of talking about first, that detect the stimuli and send signals to motor neurons or interneurons. So this is what you see, what you touch, what you smell, what you taste, all of the sensory neurons. You have interneurons that are integrated information and send the signals to one another or to the motor neurons. These are kind of considered like the messengers, like the go-between. When you say, I don't want to be the middleman, this is the middleman, is the interneurons. You can tell that by their root word inter. And then you have your motor neurons, and these are carrying signals to the effectors. So this is the things that are affected because of the sensory neuron that talked with the interneuron that sent to the motor neuron. So this is muscles, this is glands. So most of the time you think of that example with when you see a car coming and then your brain says, oh, maybe I should get back on the sidewalk, and you get back on the sidewalk and you move over to that because your legs moved you over there. But then there's this other motor neuron that you may not think of the glands. So you're maybe, and this could be a lot of different situations and it's different for every individual, but you could have some sort of emotional experience, whether that be your team just won a tournament or a championship, or you just got a really good grade on a test, or it could be something on the other spectrum, something bad is happening and you're feeling that sensation. And it's a sensory experience that your glands, which release hormones, are communicating to the rest of your body. These can also be a little bit of a learned behavior as well, when our body tries to understand what is a good experience and what is a bad experience. And that could be different for everybody, but just realize that your body can, in your central nervous system, control a lot of different things, which is also why people take concussions really seriously, right? Damaging the brain, strokes, not getting enough oxygen to the brain. That's why it affects a lot of different things when you injure that central nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord. They're very important. Okay, here's a little bit more about those three types of neurons. So we have that sensory neuron here at the top, okay? This is showing the cell body and the axon. You have the intraneuron here that's going from the sensory neuron to that motor neuron, which is here. The structure of the sensory neurons, the interneurons, and the motor neurons, pretty much all neurons have a cell body. So there's a middle part to a neuron. When I overdraw, and if I was in class right now, I would probably draw this cartoon here. When I think of a neuron, I think of this shape. I think of the middle part being a cell body, which we see that here. These are considered the dendrites. They're like the branches on a tree. I'm just going to put D-E-N. All right, then you have the neuron or the nucleus here. That's the nucleus in the center, which houses the communication kind of coding, I guess you could say. So this is a neuron. Nucleus. So sorry that that's really bad handwriting, but that says neuron nucleus. That is the cell body here, which you can also see in that description if you don't like my handwriting. Then you have the axon, which is how other neurons communicate with other neurons. So as you can see here, between the sensory neuron and the interneuron is an axon. And here, between the interneuron and a motor neuron is an axon. And this is considered an axon. Okay, in between these, we're going to talk about what these are. There's Schwann cells and the myelin sheath. Between that, we call that the node of Ranvier. And we'll talk about that. This is just showing the direction of the conduction. So if you're familiar with the word conduction or conducting, this is that direction that that sensation is going from. So here's a little bit more about the specific neuron structure. Like I said, you have a cell body, you have dendrites and axons. Okay, so that cell body is that main kind of middle part of that neuron. You have dendrites, which are the small branches. This is the input zone. This is how things are taken into that neuron. Then this neuron needs to communicate with the next neuron down the road. So it uses the axon with that trigger zone and the conducting zone and the output zone to communicate to the other neurons. This is considered an axon. These are the axon endings. And then essentially there would be another neuron over here that looks really much cooler than my drawing that communicates to each other. Now, as you can imagine, it goes a lot faster than how I'm communicating to you right now. How the neurons are communicating to each other happens so fast, faster than you can snap your fingers, because your body had to tell you how to do that first. The dendrites and the axons. So this is the difference between the two, because it can get a little confusing, because you're telling me that the dendrites, you know, are how you receive information, but then the axons are how the neurons communicate with each other. So this is just kind of a table to describe the differences between the two. Dendrites carry information towards that cell body, like we talked about. There are 1 per cell in most sensory neurons and many per cell in most other neurons. They branch, but they're closely branched to that cell body, and they have no insulating sheath, and we'll talk about what that means here in a couple of slides. They carry information away from the cell body. These are axons. Axons carry that information away, so these are going to the neuron, these are going away from the neuron. There are 1 per cell in most neurons, and they branch farther from the cell body, so they're going away from the cell body, and they do have an insulating sheath for most of those cells. So here's that word sheath, that myelin sheath. They are made up of Schwann cells, and I don't know if you guys ever grew up with the Schwann's truck that would come to your door with frozen goodies, but this is not that. These are Schwann cells that support the neurons and are essential for normal functioning of the nervous system. Okay, these are those little marshmallow-like, or they look like little teeth, essentially, on the axon that form what's called a myelin sheath. And this word kind of reminds me of the word sheet, like on your bed or a blanket. And that's kind of the way I think about it when I think about this. It's like a blanket. It's a lipid covering over the axons to increase the speed of the nerve impulses that are conducted, and it acts as insulation. So it kind of is like a little blanket around or a sheet, a myelin sheet. It's another way to think of it, like a blanket that is around that axon that provides insulation and allows for quicker conduction of that electrical signal down the neurons to communicate with each other. So here's just another picture of that central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, which we've seen before. Here's a picture of brain cells, also called neuroglia, and these are what make up the bulk of the brain, and these are the brain cells that insulate and support the neurons. It's kind of a cool picture. So our brain is really important, like I talked about. So how do we protect our brain? What parts of our body allow us to protect that really important type of brain that we have? We have meninges. These are 3 membranes that cover the brain. They're called meninges. We have the cerebral spinal fluid, which you've maybe heard of before. This is like essentially a cushion or like a bath that the brain sits in. It's fluid. So when somebody deals with some sort of trauma to the brain, such as a concussion, your brain essentially is floating in this cerebrospinal fluid, and it maybe shifts or hits against that skull, either impacted or moving forward the other way. And this is where we see like some brain bleeding or damage. You also have the blood-brain barrier, the BBB, that stops harmful substances from reaching the brain. Okay, we are familiar with some things that do get to the brain, such as alcohol, right? It inhibits, or it's a depressant, so it affects the mood or the behaviors of the person who is taking that substance. There are also other substances that get to the brain as well. They affect the mood, the behaviors, things like that. So those are the things that can get through that blood-brain barrier, but there are some things that cannot as well that help us, such as different toxins or other chemicals that could be poisonous. Here's the human brain structure. We're thankful that we don't have to memorize this today. A couple of the main words or like things that I would like you to just kind of be familiar with if I reference them. The medulla oblongata. All right, so here's that part of that, almost part of that brain stem here. That's the medulla oblongata. You've got the pons, the cerebellum, which this one reminds me of the word Cinderella, and I'll tell you why in a couple of slides here. We have the midbrain, okay? We have the part of the optic nerve, and I'm guessing you guys can understand that the optic nerve has to do with our seeing. If you ever go see an optometrist, that's your eye doctor. You have your corpus callosum here, your hypothalamus, your thalamus, and your pineal gland, which is located here, kind of in the middle part of the brain. When we talk about your brain stem, so this is essentially how your brain connects to that spinal cord. We've kind of got a light purple, light blue, and a little bit darker blue colored system here. So I may highlight them in different colors. Let's see here. We have the medulla oblongata, like I said, which contains the reflex centers for regulating breathing, heartbeat, and blood pressure. And that is down here. The midbrain is this purple part here, and this is what is the relay station between the brain and the spinal cord, essentially your vision, your hearing, kind of like that telephone center. Then you have the pons. This is a bridge between the cerebellum, which is here. This is the cerebellum. This is the pons, okay? And this allows us to regulate breathing, reflex center, and also for head movements. So when you say yes or no with your head, or maybe you're stretching out your neck, that would all be from the pons to the cerebellum. Now the cerebellum, this is the one that reminds me of the word Cinderella because it helps maintain posture and helps with integrating sensory input from eyes, ears, joints, muscles, about the current position of the body. When I was learning the different parts of the brain, they say that this one reminds me of Cinderella. You know, think of Cinderella spinning around a ballroom in the movie Cinderella. Her cerebellum would be helping her to maintain that posture and coordinate that voluntary movement that allows the learning of new motor skills such as playing the piano or hitting a baseball or dancing. So that's what this one reminds me is the word Cinderella. The cerebrum shouldn't get mixed up with cerebellum. Very similar words, couple of L's missing from this one. The cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain. So this whole yellow part is called the cerebrum. And the cerebrum is divided into 4 lobes. And each lobe has a different, essentially, function or role. This is that largest part of the brain. It's important for the sensory information and how it's analyzed, and the motor commands, how they're issued, and the language. If ever you've seen somebody or heard of somebody having maybe a stroke or some sort of brain damage, where the brain is damaged actually can correlate with how the symptoms are reacting. So for example, if you have an injury to the frontal lobe of your brain, this is the primary motor area and the conscious thought. So this obviously would come with some disorders as well if some of this part in the blue here was damaged. You have your temporal lobe. This is the green part here. This is helping with your primary auditory, smell, and speech area. So if ever somebody has a stroke and then maybe they're having a hard time formulating words or learning that behavior to speak with language again, maybe there was some damage to the temporal lobe. Then you have the parietal lobe, which is the primary somatosensory taste area, which is here. Sorry, my Zoom was covering that. And then you have the occipital lobe, which is the primary vision area. So that's also why maybe somebody gets a concussion in a soccer game or a football game, and maybe they got hit from behind, and then they have some sort of vision impairments and things like that afterwards. Maybe they, they say the quote, seeing stars, or you're kind of blacking out or things like that. That can be from that occipital lobe. I have a family friend who works at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and she is a eye doctor who works with college football and NFL football, and she has a study out where she can look into somebody's eyes and determine if they have a concussion and the severity of that concussion just by looking in their eyes. Now, I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully that can trickle down to a lot of other sports and programs as well. So the thick band of axons is called the corpus callosum, and this provides communication between the right and the left hemispheres. So you have two hemispheres of your brain. You have the left cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemisphere. This is the corpus callosum, which is that group of axons that helps communicate between the two. This is also, there's different, functions for each, the left and the right cerebral hemisphere. You maybe heard of the things where it's like your left side of your brain actually functions the right side of your body. So if I lift and raise my right hand, or I lift and raise my left hand, it's different sides of my brain that are creating that sensation. It's why you can, tap your head and rub your stomach. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. I'm a professional at that. Maybe you've had, it's the reason, you can somewhat multitask. I can grab two different things at one time, or things like that. So your brain allows there to be a couple of different functions going on at once, but also the right and the left hemisphere have a little bit more specific functions than just the left and right side of your body. The left hemisphere, it helps with language, math, logical operations, and processing of serial sequences. And then you have the right hemisphere, which is a stronger pattern of recognition, the nonverbal thinking, and the emotional processing. Maybe you've heard of the joke of people being like, well, I'm definitely left hemisphere dominant. If you're very analytical, you like numbers, you like black and white answers, you like to analyze things, that would maybe be the joke that you're left hemisphere dominant, which is not actually true. Or if somebody's right hemisphere dominant, they like to make emotional decisions, and that doesn't mean a bad thing. Or they like to really think through things, or they really recognize patterns of behavior and things like that. So that's just a little funny way to remember that. Then we have the what does the spinal cord look like? Luckily, last week, hopefully you got to see the model of the vertebrae. We have a picture of the spinal cord here, and this spinal cord, let's see here, I'm trying to move this over. This spinal cord here is made up of dorsal root branches. So if we were to cut the, essentially the spinal cord in half, you would see this is the spinal cord here, and we have some dorsal branches here. Okay, when we look at it this way, we have the vertebrae. I'm just checking my email. Okay, no. This is also the vertebrae. We have this is how they're vertically stacked on each other. Here you have the spinal nerves and the spinal cord that runs down the middle of that vertebrae. So you have white matter and gray matter in your spinal cord here. The white matter is this lighter color around the outside, and the gray matter is kind of that butterfly looking thing in the middle. So this is just showing how what is white matter versus gray matter. It's the different parts of that spinal cord, and then just kind of what it looks like. It's a very interesting and intricate part of our body. A little bit more about that peripheral nervous system here, that PNS. It includes cranial nerves there are 12 pairs of, and it contains spinal nerves, which there are 31 pairs of. These are what conduct impulses to and from the brain, and the spinal nerves conduct impulses to and from the spinal cord. So essentially you've got kind of this process where it'll go, the brain maybe conducts it to the spinal cord gets it to the spinal nerves. It's kind of like this chain reaction, and it's divided, we've talked about before, into those two different divisions. the somatic division and the autonomic division. The somatic division is that voluntary movement, things that you're essentially telling your body to do to an extent, right? Maybe you're just, there's different commands, or even though you may not think about it too much, like picking up a cup. But then the autonomic division is that involuntary. So the things that we're not telling our body to do that it does through chemical reactions and electrical impulses. Okay, so here's a little bit more about that parasympathetic versus sympathetic division. The sympathetic division, it does that fight or flight response by speeding up the metabolism, the heart rate, the breathing, while slowing down and regulating other functions. So what this means is that if there was some sort of dangerous situation, an adrenaline situation, you're scared, something's happening to you, maybe you're in a really intense game, things like that, your body goes into fight or flight, which means it's trying to just protect itself. And the way it does that is by either fighting through whatever that is or getting out of that situation, that flight. And it does this by speeding up your heart rate and breathing. It slows down other regulatory functions, such as resting and digesting. Now, I know this isn't the case for everyone, but most of the time, if you're like in an athletic event or a big event, and you're, maybe your adrenaline's going, your body's really not thinking about going to the bathroom at that time. Now, there's always like nerves or things like that. People call it nerves when you're nervous, you have to go to the bathroom. But really what your body, if you're going through an adrenaline situation where you had to run quickly across the street because a car was coming, you're not thinking about like digesting your food. Your body kind of shuts down those other regulatory functions. Then you have your parasympathetic, and this is what counteracts that sympathetic division. So by bringing up a relaxed state, this is that rest and digest. It slows down your metabolism and your heart rate and your breathing, and it returns other functions to normal. So this is kind of the most common division. I also think of this as like while you're sleeping or while you're sitting, this is what your body is doing. This is a diagram here, figure 14-17, that shows the two divisions of the autonomic nervous system. On the left here, we have that sympathetic division, and on the right, we have that parasympathetic division. So what happens is if your body has some sort of sensation to tell you that, you're in fight or flight, you have to have an adrenaline reaction. What happens is your heart rate speeds up. You are dilating your air passages, meaning that you are breathing a little bit heavier. It cuts off, inhibits the activity of the kidneys, the stomach, the pancreas. We're not going to digest food right now. We have to run across the street really fast for some reason. It decreases that intestinal activity, like I said. The ganglion, it increases that more of that sexual response as well. It inhibits your urination, etc., etc. So this is that sympathetic division. That parasympathetic division, now you're in that rest and digest. So your body wants to conserve energy, right? We conserve energy in the parasympathetic division in case there comes a time when we do have to go into the sympathetic division. So what happens is we constrict instead of dilating our breathing. So we slow our breathing down. We start to increase activity of the stomach and the pancreas and increase that intestinal activity and stimulate urination. So our body is always functioning back and forth. And what drives this is a neurotransmitter you've maybe heard of called acetylcholine. And then there's a neurotransmitter also called norepinephrine. The norepinephrine in this diagram isn't the best to show it, but it's kind of that darker magenta color. This is that norepinephrine. And then the acetylcholine is in blue. And essentially they kind of counteract each other. As you can see, there's more blue on the right than there is over here on the left, but there is some things that have to be inhibited on the left in order for the other things to be activated. So just a review here, we talked about the different divisions of the nervous system. So we have the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. We have the three types of neurons, which are the motor, the inter, and the sensory. neurons. We have the structure of the neuron. Remember, we talked about the cell body, the dendrites, the axons, and the nucleus in the middle, and how they communicate. Remember, the dendrites bring information into that neuron, and the axons communicate between different neurons. And then we have the different parts of the brain and their function. We talked about the medulla oblongata, the pons, the midbrain, the cerebellum. We talked about the lobes of the cerebrum and how they have different types of functions. And then we have the function of the peripheral nervous system, which is that parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions, that fight or flight, or that rest and digest. And that's all I have for the PowerPoint today. Does anybody have any questions over the material that I went over? All right. I just want to make sure that I pause long enough for that. If you do have a question, feel free to stick around. Other than that, that's all I have for you today, and you're free to go. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. Check my Wartburg for that lecture assignment, and we will see you soon. Just remember, we do not have lab on Wednesday. It'll be an off day that I would normally give you on like the last week of class, but we're just going to do it while I'm in quarantine so that we can still do that other fun activity together. Thank you so much. Got any questions, the rest of you guys? Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Have you graded my second exam?
Second exam. Let me check. What does it show you right now? I graded all the exams this weekend, but I know
The second one is the one you opened up again for me.
Oh.
Because of the internet, and it hasn't been graded yet, so just asking.
Yeah, let me go. So I grade them by question, not by individual, which could have pulled different for you. Okay. So I have an exam up here on my screen, and I have your grade. Is it not showing you something?
No, it just says there's no grade in it.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. Okay, attempt. Well, I mean, you did very well. You got what I have in front of me, you have an 84. And I don't see two exams. I just see all your responses. I can show you.
Are you talking about the third exam?
Yeah, or do you mean exam 2?
I mean exam 2.
Oh, sorry. I was a little confused about what you were asking. I remember what we're talking about now. Exam 2. Ah, there it is as a blank because I forgot and dropped the ball. I'll grade that right now for you, and you should be able to see that, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying with me. Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
You too, bye. Any other questions?
I had a question on the last exam.
Okay.
The question about male hormone regulation.
Yes. Did I not give you partial credit?
It said I got 2 correct out of the 4, and that it scored it as 0 out of 4. I was just wondering if you could check that for me.
Yes, I had one other person that it did that to, and I can go change that. So male testosterone levels. Yes, you got 2 right. Change that. There you go. You got your 2 points back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a question, Barbara? Got a question for me, Barbara? All right. I don't hear one. Shoot me an email if you need anything.